how a decision is made, right? So, for example, back in 2004, when the debate in the presidential election was about, or just around the Iraq War, for example, was about civil liberties, then folks on the left were doing really well, because in the frame of civil liberties, there was a lot of things to go up against why the Iraq War was a good idea. But if the question was framed as national security, it had a whole different effect, right? This becomes very important on a presidential election, right? So who can tell me what the messages are of the two sides in this election? What is the Republican message?
That the reason why we're engaging is because we're protecting our country from preemptive strikes. Like, we're hitting them before they can tend to protect us.
So they want to say that, I mean, that actually, if you watch the GOP convention, they didn't really talk much about that. But if they were, you're saying that the Bush doctrine, right, of preemptive war. What else is that about? Who else? You just heard about
one night it was all about we built it.
We built it, right?
Built it.
It's about individual responsibility, right? And this is why they try to go out there and they sell this idea that with a bit of tax breaks, they can get folks working again, right? That if they can just get enough money to millionaires and billionaires, that'll trickle down and feed the middle class and folks struggling to get into it. That's what they would say, right? What else?
There was, unfortunately, from the Asian governor, fearing the foreign.
Fear, there's just fear.
Fearing the foreign.
There's
illegal immigration and all, that's the real problem. And they had a woman, minority, Asian daughters, Asian immigrants, deliver that. And I was so upset. That was the most upsetting moment of the entire convention.
There's something about culture, right? That there should be a standard. The idea of diverse America.
There's a real America. There's a certain kind of America. It's not a diverse America. That's what I heard. You're going to go back to the America.
Going back. Yeah. This is a very big thing for Republicans, right? This idea, the conservative philosophy that if we can go backwards, we're actually going to progress, right? Other thoughts? President isn't working, right? This is a slogan. We hear this a lot, right? So, right, if campaigns are about one of two things, for any incumbent campaign, it's about why things are on the right track. And for any opposing campaign, it's all about why there needs to be a drastic change, right? So, it's not working as part of this change, right? What are the messages that you hear from the Democrats?
You finished the job.
Get it done, right? We're on the march. Let us take it all the way, right? And don't turn back now.
Stronger together.
We're strong. There's idea that there's power in collective strength, right? Right? What else? This idea that we're beholden to each other as a national community. We're stronger than if we work only as individuals, right? So you see these different contrast pieces here, right? There's a collective strength. There's a personal responsibility is where the buck stops. There is an idea of who we are as a nation, right? There is, and you're going to see this through this week, right? So today, really, the message at the convention has been really about community engagement. Conventions used to always be about just nominating the nominee for the presidential election. But this is a trend that started to change in Denver. In Denver, the president's campaign used that last night at Investment Field to literally sign up 25,000 new volunteers. And you're going to see that same sort of energy come out of this. So all of a sudden, this is about how we come together, how we let the public and our troops know how we can all get on the same page. This is a very important piece of it. And this comes from his narrative about being a community organizer, right? This is about really this bottom-up organizing, right? Which is very different from the old way of communications, right? So at the end of the day, there are two themes that become really important. It's this idea that the middle class is slipping away, right? And that's because of an economic situation that we live in. And so you'll see that being tomorrow and Tuesday's themes at the convention. And just like we were talking about this important choice for the future, the president is going to outline his vision for where he sees the country going during another 4 years in a second. So he will present that roadmap, right? But so message becomes very important. It's very key. It's the first step in any sort of communication step. Let me tell you the 4 other ones, and then we can be done with our day, I guess. I got a long day. Okay. Once you have your message, it's not good enough to just keep that in your pocket. You have to get it out. So what do you need to do? Second thing is to research your market. So first, you have to know your message. Second, you have to research your market. This means who is it that you're really going to go out and communicate with, right? What kind of outreach plan do you got, right? If you're going to go knocking on doors, which doors are you going to knock on? If this is going to be going to your family, friends, to have conversations, which family and friends are you going to talk to? If it's going to be going to your community in the national sense, although you should probably focus on Nevada, Virginia, and Florida. If you're going to do that, then how are you going to get to them? Are you going to use ethnic media? Are you going to go to a blog? What is your means and channel of getting to your target audience? So know your message, research your market, then third is you have to determine your strategy. How are you going to do this? What are the goals and timelines that you're going to put in place to make sure that you get from point A to point B, right? Then fourth is that you actually have to plan your activities, right? You've given yourself some metrics, you've given yourself a timeline, now you got to plan your activities. Are you going to have folks come to your home and do a little, tea party with chai and green tea, which they're not serving at their tea parties? Are you going to call people, right? How are you going to do it? This is where you have to plan your activities. And then fifth, which is probably the most important thing, is you have to actually produce your materials, right? So this might be a letter. It might be finding a flyer from the campaign office. It might be creating a little YouTube video. Whatever it is, these are the 5 things that you've got to do. You've got to know your message. You've got to research your market. You've got to determine your strategy. You've got to plan your activities. And then you've got to produce your materials. Now, an interesting thing happened to me on the way here. My mother called. And she calls me all the time. She doesn't really think convention time, not convention time. But every time she calls me, she always goes through a laundry list of things that I'm supposed to do. Toby, I know you've extended your tax deadline. Have you paid your taxes? Toby, I know you don't like to do laundry. Did you do your laundry? Right? She goes through this list of things to do. And I knew that I was going to be doing this dating game, well, kind of. And I knew that I was going to talk about this concept called tactical reliance. And this became very important in this situation with my mom, because every time she calls, she always says the same thing, but it never motivates me to do anything different. So instead of doing what I usually do, which is, yes, Mom, yes, Mom, yes, Mom, I was silent. And I said to her, Mom, you need tactical reliance. All of a sudden, there was silence. And then she went right back to the mom. But I talk about this because tactical variety is a concept that comes from a theater theorist named Stanislavski. And Stanislavski, he teaches the method, right, for the actors. He says to every actor, once you get on a stage, every actor should think about where they are, and then they need to think about where they're going, and then how they're going to get from point A to point B. So for example, a mime gets on stage, has to establish that that mime is stuck in a box, but has to realize in that actor's head that they're trying to get out of the box, and then they have to do something to get from point A to point B. That means banging on the wall. That means jumping. That means rocking. Any verb in the dictionary is something that you do. But the thing is, if the actor keeps doing the same thing, and it doesn't work, it doesn't become very entertaining, right? So the actor has to be open to the new information after they use that verb. And if it doesn't work, they have to use a different verb. And you have to keep going like that until you find something that does work. And then once it does work, you got to keep doing it until you get to your destination. This becomes very important in every interpersonal dynamic that we have in our lives. Talked about it with my mom. I'm obviously still trying different tactics. But this is no different in how we connect with voters. It's not any different than how we connect with our friends and our families. If someone we're talking to doesn't respond to us, then we can't really get to where we need to be. So we have to think, what does it look like? When I'm talking to you, and you're not asleep, you smile. So I know that she heard what I said, right? So what are the things that, when we communicate with the people out there, tell us that we've actually driven our message home? Now look, we started talking about this conversation today, about the middle class, the strength of being able to, for people who aren't in the middle class, to get into the middle class. The reality is, we know the president's got real big challenges, but making sure that we can communicate to folks that we have only just begun, and that we must stay on this path to really reap benefits, rather than turning back the clock to what was a very catastrophic time, right? It's important that we connect and make sure that we're communicating that. So what does that mean? That means for folks who have been thinking and living in our communities in the last 10 years, the last 12 years, they've seen amazing changes in this country, right? They've seen the country go from prosperity to recession. They've seen the country go from from peace to war. They've seen their wages go down. They've seen unemployment go up. It's changed the entire conversation. But the reality is, if we are going to rebuild the economy in this country, as the president is trying to do, it's not an overnight task, right? We didn't get into this problem overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But we're starting to see the motions go in the direction they must, right? Bottom fell out the month the president came to office, but we're starting to build from there. But when we communicate this, we have to make sure that we're talking to folks and listening to them, so that we can engage the way that now communication is done. I gave you 5 steps on how communications happens. The reality is that back when Parag and I were working on the Gore campaign, we knew that we could put a television ad on ABC, CBS, and NBC, and we would reach about 70% of the likely voters in that particular media market. It doesn't quite work that way anymore, right? There are many more channels of information now. So what communications has evolved into is really engagement. This is about how you're able to connect with folks, and then to continue that conversation onward and onward after that. And that now there are many different platforms on which we can do that. And the mix of online and offline is how we're going to do it. With that, my Twitter address is @Toby Chaudhuri, TOBYCHAUDHURI. Add me on Facebook. There's no acronym for it, but I will leave you with this one thing. Continue the conversation with me, because our date is over. But the engagement has only just begun. Is that a yes? There you go.
Anything Korean?
Do we know that says in Korean? Oh, there you go. Oh, you have that. Okay, I'm gonna do this about it. Hi, I'm back. We're serial dating. I want to talk to you about message delivery. Okay, so we've talked about the elements of a good message. Toby's talked to you about tactical delivery. I want to talk to you about what's the most effective way to get our message out there. And then after me, you're going to take Randy Poe for a few minutes, and he's going to talk to you about specifically with specialty media. So as Toby left off, he was talking about how 12 years ago, TV media was really effective. But the problem is that there have been a lot of changes in the way we get messages out in campaigns. I've been doing this, my first campaign was 1990, so 22 years, and like the entire world has changed in just that amount of time in terms of what we do in campaigns. Oh look, you got it. Okay, so 15 campaigns, go next. We all know that FDR, of course, changed campaigns. He was the first one to use radio. Next one. We know that John F. Kennedy was the first one to use television, changed the entire landscape. And then, of course, there's Al Gore, Howard Dean, and Barack Obama, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost of the Internet. Gore invented it, Dean used it, Barack Obama perfected it, right? But, next one. Here's the thing. All these tools, the mass communication that we're so used to using, have become less and less effective. People now own DVRs, so they fast forward to the TV commercials we make. You now have Pandora and iPods in your car and satellite XM radio, so you don't listen to the radio ads as much. How many of you don't own a landline and all you have is a cell phone at home? Yeah, you know why? Because 10 years ago somebody woke up and said, this works at home. Right? So as a result, for those of you who are phone banking on campaigns and finding it very frustrating, because you're getting disconnected lines, call block, you have people who are yelling at each other on the phone, it's because it's much, much harder to get these cell phone lists. You can't use cell phone lists in campaigns, right? And then last but not least is mail. I think mail is just an enormous waste. Next slide, because, well, I'll get to mail in a second. The internet helps with a lot of things. So Toby's right. We can use the internet for organizing. Anybody here a blogger? Any bloggers in the room? Hello, of course. Hello. Hello, bloggers. No, raise your hands high and proud. Come on. Be proud to be a blogger. Bloggers, I love you. You kept the progressive flame burning during the darkest days of the Bush administration. Thank you for that. But here's my thing. What I say to my blogger friends all the time is at some point, you have to stop yelling at each other in all caps and take a shower and get out of your mom's basement and talk to real people. Because the thing is, a movement of the convinced, I mean that with love, a movement of the convinced is not a movement, right? It's fun to preach to the choir because the choir will sing at you. But at some point you have to turn around and preach to the congregation because they're the ones who came to be saved. So the internet is a useful tool, but if all we're ever doing is talking to people online, next one, we get into these cul-de-sacs of people who already made up their minds. We're not talking to people who are movable, is my point. They're not people who are changeable, right? Because most of the people on these blogs already know exactly where they stand. They've dug in their heels. So, this is the most important thing I've learned in politics. The most important thing I learned is in order to get one additional vote, this is a study done by Yale University and the AAPI, to get one additional vote that we didn't already have for our candidate or our cause, it takes 389 pieces of mail. A lot of mail. If you work for the DNC or the RNC, you send out millions and millions of pieces of mail, so you get quite a few votes that way. It takes 460 phone calls to get that same one new vote. It only takes 14 doorbells. 14 knocks at the door will get us that same vote. You know why? Because there's something innately human about that face-to-face interaction. When a person comes knocking at your door, when a person comes to ask you for your vote, it's memorable. It hits a part of your brain that none of these other forms of voter contact can do. So, 4 years ago, the Obama campaign of the DNC pioneered a tool. It was called Neighbor to Neighbor. Because we know that the number one most effective way to get a vote for our candidate is for our candidate to talk directly to the voter. For Barack Obama to go door to door to 65 million households and ask each one of them for their votes, but that's not possible. The second most effective way to do it is for somebody the voter knows to come and talk to them. So we're trying to get out of, Nina talked about how this organization was born out of the Howard Dean campaign. A lot of us worked on that campaign. It was a great campaign. We learned a lot of important lessons from it. One of the most important lessons we learned is this. You cannot win the Iowa caucus by importing kids from New York, Texas, and California to come to Iowa. You actually have to build people from Iowa because it turns out we're a very provincial people. And I don't just mean Americans, I mean like people, humans. We're very provincial, right? We tend to trust people who are like us, who have similar experiences to us, who know what it's like to be us. So, what we pioneered was a tool 4 years ago that allowed you to go online, type in your zip code, type in your address, and out would pop a list of 25 people in your neighborhood who were targeted key voters for this campaign. It would give you a script, it would give you a list to print out, you would walk 10 doors that way, you'd walk 10 doors that way, you'd go upstairs, you'd go downstairs, you'd talk to those voters, you'd come back, and you'd report what you learned. And that last part is important. It's not enough to have the conversation, you have to then come back and tell us what you got from the conversations so we know what to do next. But here's what worries me. Can I borrow this? How many of you have gone door to door? How many of you have ever gone door to door? Oh, good. Okay. So, how many of you have ever seen this? No. Hi, my name is Parag, and I'm here today on behalf of Barack Obama. Barack Obama wants to move America forward. And I believe that for the last 4 years, what he has done with respect to student loans and making sure to save Social Security and not privatize stand with me. Anybody seen this? Anybody? You don't have to admit you've been in this conversation. But anybody seen this conversation? Yeah, that kid came to my door one time, and I wanted to slap him around for a while, right? Because here's the thing. I don't doubt for a minute that that kid believes in Barack Obama. My God, he's volunteering his time for the campaign to go and fight rabid dogs in the neighborhood and have these conversations. God bless him. But the scripts are important, and you need to use the scripts. The scripts that campaigns give you, whether it's the presidential, the congressional, the local city council, whatever campaign you're working on, those scripts are important because, as Toby and I will tell you, we want you to stay on message, right? We want you to be disciplined about the message. We want you to say the message. But you've got to be a real person. So take that script, read it, then read it again, then read it a third time, then take out a pen and rewrite it the way you would say those exact same messages, in your words, in your authenticity, and memorize it and put it away. Because when you go to the doors, I want you to stand firm. I want you to hold your head up high. I want you to make eye contact. Knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm Parag Mehta. I live 2 doors down from you. I don't think we've met yet, but I want to come by and introduce myself. Because we have a big election coming up in 2 weeks. And I'm the local organizer in this condo building for Barack Obama's re-election campaign. I want to tell you, I believe in our president. It's been a tough 4 years, and he has helped turn the ship around. He is helping to steer us back in the direction we need to go. We remember what it was like when the other side was in power. We remember what they did. We want to make sure we never go back to that again. We want to make sure that we're constantly moving our country forward. I need your help, because we are in an area that's going to make a difference. Our votes, our community could be the deciding factor in this election. I need your help. So here's what I'm going to do. I just want to make sure today that you're registered to vote. And if you're not, I have some voter registration forms. Can I get you to fill one of these out? And what I'll do is I will check in a couple of days to make sure that it's been processed by the Board of Elections, and I will come back and I will give you a note on your door to let you know that you're ready to vote. You're all cleared for election day. Would that be cool? Great. And then, a day before the election, I come back to that same voter, knock, knock, knock. Hey, it's me, Parag, remember, from down the hall? Just want to remind you, election day is tomorrow. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Did you get my note about the fact that I made sure your voter registration went through? Good. All right, so if you need any help tomorrow, I'm just going to be 2 doors down. And also, here's my cell phone number. Call me if you need anything or have any problems at the polls. You know, they've been changing some of the voter ID laws lately, and it's a little crazy. But I want to make sure you're fully prepared to vote. And if anybody tells you that for whatever reason you can't vote, don't leave the polling place. Do not leave. Fill out a provisional ballot. Fill out a temporary ballot. Call me. I'll get somebody down there. Do not leave that polling place without voting, because it's your right. Tomorrow, we all get to exercise that right. Good luck tomorrow. And then the day after the election, this is important. The day after the election, you go back to that voter again and say, we did it. We did it. We made sure our country's going to be on the right path. I just want to say thank you. It means a lot to us. And we won't forget it. That's how we build not just a winning election, it's how we build a movement. It's how we build a party and a progressive movement that's going to win from one election to the next to the next. They always say that young people are the most important voters because it turns out that when young people vote in 3 consecutive elections for a candidate of the same party, they're likely to stay with that party for the rest of their lives. Have you ever heard of Roosevelt Democrats or Reagan Republicans, these generations of young people that shifted for a generation? We have the opportunity to do that now. Because in 2004, young people came out for John Kerry because of their incredible anger against George W. Bush and the wars he'd started. In 2008, Barack Obama inspired that generation to come back again and stand in 8-hour lines in places like Pittsburgh and Canton, Ohio. We get them back this time. That's number 3. And a generational shift happens. We get an entire generation of progressive Obama Democrats. That's a powerful thing we can do. But you've got to carry that confidence. You've got to carry that mission with you when you go to those doors. Because those 14 doors gets us that one vote. And when you are working on a campaign, when you're volunteering, when you're trying to get others to volunteer, they say, I don't want to canvass, it's hot outside. I don't want to canvass because the McMansions are too spread apart. I don't want to canvass because they're crazy dogs or roosters if you live in West Virginia. I don't want to canvass. You tell them this. Canvassing is what makes a difference. Going door to door, talking to our neighbors, talking from our values, that's what makes a difference. All right? How much time have you got?
You got a little over 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to finish with one last thing because Toby talked about his mom and I'm going to talk about mine because we're going to use mom. Okay. There's a technique, write this down, that I've learned it's very effective when you're talking to a voter. It's called cushion, position, and close. Cushion, position, and close. If you're talking to a voter who doesn't agree with you, don't argue with them. Step 1, listen to whatever they have to say. Even if it's the craziest person you've ever met, let them talk. And listen carefully to what they say. And as they're talking, try to find one area of common ground between the two of you. one thing where you two agree, one frustration that you can relate to, and start your conversation with the cushion. You're right about this. I agree with you on this. Because even for the craziest voter, that's a moment of newness. That's a moment where no one has ever come to their door and said, you're right. I agree with you. So right away, their ears perk up and they're listening in a different way. That's the cushion. Then you position. It's a pivot to whatever they care about, or whatever your common value is, to the thing you actually want to talk about. And then you close by asking them to do something. I'll give you an example. My mom used to call me, right when I was 11, she bought me a cell phone, and she would call me constantly. She didn't understand voicemail, so she'd leave these crazy messages like, Frog, I know you're there, pick up the phone, pick up the phone. I'm like, it's voicemail, we don't do. So one day I decided to cushion position close my mom. My cushioner was saying, I said, Mom, I love you. And I know you love me. You want to talk to me and I want to hear from you, but this isn't working for either one of us, and we need a better solution. That was a cushion. I accepted her value. Her value was she wanted to talk to her son. I accepted that premise. Then I positioned. I said, so I want to make a deal with you. I have an idea. What if we agreed that you would only call me one day a week, Sundays at 12 noon, your time in Texas? And here's the deal, Mom. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm not going to screen the call. I'm not going to let it go to voicemail. I'm going to be ready for that call. I'm going to answer it. That was my position. That's the deal we make. But here's the thing, Mom. I don't want to hear about whose son's getting married to who and who just got divorced and who lost their jobs and did you hear about the lady down the street. I want to hear about what's going on in your life and I want to tell you what's going on in my life. Right? Again, taking her values, not my closeness, making her my position. And I close. This is important. Mom, will you join me this afternoon? Can we do this together? Laugh all you want. It's been 12 years. My mom still calls me Sundays at noon. Pushing, position, and close. Huh?
I say the other song, you be quiet, right?
Yeah, on the other side, well, if you follow Toby's rule, put ours two together and then be quiet. Right? I'm sure Gavin will talk about the being quiet after you make the ask. Cushion, position, and close. Taking a voter from point A to point B to point C and making them feel when they get to point C that it was their idea all along. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, good afternoon. Good to see some of you folks from up this morning. And so I'm here to talk about message amplification, right? So we've gotten a lot of incredible insight. I love listening to Parag and Toby Train. I do these things with them a lot, but I never get tired of listening. They're so on top of it. They're so sharp. They're so entertaining. They're so engaging. I only hope to hopefully have that kind of engagement and ability to just entertain the way they do. So I do my best. Hopefully you guys will have a good time too. So, message amplification. Now that you know the basics of how you sort of craft your message, the basic elements and the steps of how you communicate to people and how you can engage, then let's talk about some very specific ways that we have to do so in our own communities, right? So we're here at this training because we're Asian American Pacific Islanders who are interested in looking at how we can organize and use our positions, our connections, our networks more effectively to get to the goals that we want to achieve, to elect the people we want to get elected into office, keep the people we want to keep in order to keep moving this country forward. So, quick question. Earlier there was a question about how many of you only have cell phones, right? Now, here's a follow-up question. How many of you who have cell phones have at some point in the last hour or two been on your cell phone, putting something on Facebook, texting with somebody, tweeting something? Right, a very significant number of you can do that, right? So here's a statistic. 75% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are online every single day. Every single day. 365 days a year. 75%. 3 out of 4 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this country. Right. So that means that one of the very effective avenues that we can use to influence our own networks, right, to use that insight that we have, that talking to people who we already know, who we already have that kind of trust relationship with, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues, coworkers, fellow students, classmates, things like that. That's where we can use our social networks, right? We have all these great tools: Facebook, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have I'm trying to think of some other ones, but there's a bunch of stuff. Pinterest, another one that's become very popular. These are great tools to communicate with the folks in our networks, right? And when we do so, right, we act as, you may have heard this term before, echo chambers, right? Echo chambers. And one of the first times we really started to hear this term echo chamber used a lot in political communication was actually several years ago with the advent of Fox News, right? Everyone's familiar with Fox News, right? So Fox News was a kind of brilliant sort of creation in many ways. You know, Roger Ailes, who was a sort of legendary, right, political strategist and communication person for the Republicans, was one of Reagan's guys, you know, was worked with both Bushes, you know, came up with this idea that we had this network, right, that could advance our frame on all of these topics, whether it's about the Iraq War, whether it's about tax cuts and individual responsibility, whether it's about, you know, welfare and things like that, and the messaging that tends to go along with that, and We have an ability to get that message not only out, but to have it be repeated and in various venues and forms. Then people are going to start hearing it from all angles, right? And it's really going to start to penetrate through into their consciousness, right? But in a very short period of time, frankly, Fox News hasn't been around very long, that's actually starting to become less effective, right? Cable news viewership is actually pretty low, right? And even Fox News, which is supposed to be this really, juggernaut of cable news messaging, is actually pretty low in viewership when you compare it to virtually any news program. Yet, you hear the Fox News frame a lot, right? And the reason is because people on the right, in the Republican Party and in other groups that are allied with them, right, have learned how to effectively use that message and repeat it throughout their own network, right? So, one thing that you'll notice, right, Republicans are very good at getting on TV programs, particularly those Sunday talk shows, on local news programs, things like that. And you never really hear any variation in their message. Whatever was reported that morning on Fox News, right, is going to be repeated again at noon in the local broadcast, and then at evening news, local news program, and then all of them are going on their Facebook pages, etc. The politicians who are running for office are saying the exact same thing, right? So over and over and over again, it's echoing, 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 echoing. Think about the ability that we could have as a community to do that exact same thing. 75% of us online every day, right? Right there's an avenue for us to do so. A lot of us are on Facebook, a lot of us are on Twitter. A lot of us have the ability to echo our messaging throughout that methodology, right? And one of the other things that this has enabled us to do is it's enabled very simple messages, right? This is where values and understanding the power of values becomes even more important. Simple messages can now predominate in many ways over more complex messages, right? People aren't really interested, when you're on Facebook, right, and you click on someone's link, somebody posts something, you look at the headline, right, or whatever the tagline is, you say, oh, that looks interesting. And you click on it. What happens when you click on it and you see at the bottom, it's like page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do you read the rest of that article? Most of the time I don't, right? I'm like, not enough time, right? What do you like to look at the most? For a lot of us, it's going to be that really funny picture that has a caption on it, right? So what do we remember probably the most in terms of a single image? If you had to think of a single image from last week's Republican National Convention, what is it? Empty chair, right? Everybody's saying the same thing, right? So think about the fact that a simple and really what was the message of that, right? It was a picture of a guy talking to a chair, right? It was hilarious though, it was funny. It immediately grabbed people's interest. And if you think about it deeper though, right, a lot of people tend to deride this kind of political communication, say, oh, this is really, simplified, sort of made on crude, and this means that we don't really talk about the issues anymore, et cetera, right? And I mean, maybe there's some value in merit in that, but at the same time, it does convey, right? When you look at that message, when you look at that picture, when you're talking about the chair, what do you think of? What does it make you think about the party, the Republican Party? It's an empty chair, right? It's devoid of ideas. It's sort of this meaningless, sort of kind of random, crazy kind of thing, right? Just sort of shouting into the wind, right? And that's something that can be used very, very effectively, right? And one of the things that kind of plays into well is to sort of push on to Romney, right? That Romney doesn't give you detail. He doesn't talk about what he wants to do. That his whole strategy is basically to say, we need change to me, but I'm not really going to tell you what that is because I know that if I get too detailed about what that change is, you're going to start to become a little bit nervous, right? But being able to convey that message in one image, like that Clint Eastwood picture, is amazing, right? And that's the kind of thing you can do through social media. So there's sort of two roles, and I'm stealing this totally from Cloud, if anybody is on Cloud or uses that Cloud app. But I like to use the terminology because it's very protected in one particular respect. So you know how you use Cloud, this is a program that sort of measures your influence on social media. It categorizes you as a different type of influencer. And two of the categories I think are particularly important for us in college. One is called a broadcaster, and one is called a pundit. Right? A broadcaster is someone who basically takes other information of what's going on and rebroadcasts it out to their own networks. Right? And they do so effectively because their networks have come to trust that person as a source of that information. Right? So this is where you get into the strategy of amplification through social media. Right? You have to have a particular way you want to approach it. So if you want to be an effective broadcaster, you want people to trust you for information on a certain source, right? You need to be consistently talking about that issue. You need to be consistently publishing and putting information out onto the internet or into your social media presences that talk about that issue, right? So you get people used to this idea of coming back to you and seeing what you're talking about. What's the latest? Oh, Vibrant, for example, if I think, I need to know what's the latest going on with, say, labor issues, right? And I can know Parag is going to be talking a lot about what's going on in the Department of Labor, right? I have a lot of friends who know about my alma mater, American Community. They may may be political or they may be not, but they care about AAPI issues for various reasons. And they know at the very least that, even if I don't agree with Rainey's, crazy liberal views on everything, right, I can still trust him and go to him as a source of information on what's going on with AAPIs, because I know he's passionate about it. We share that one issue, and I know he's always out there talking about it. So I can get a pulse of what's going on. How many of you are familiar with the characters on advertising, like, for example, Flo on like Progressive Insurance, or that guy Mayhem in the State Farm insurance commercials, right? So that type of advertising, does anybody know what that's called? It's called a continuous character, right? A continuous character. And earlier we heard about how communications has evolved into engagement, right? Because of the change in the shifts in methodology. So marketers, right, people who do marketing for products and companies, discovered that people nowadays don't want to just watch a commercial or see an advertising slogan or listen to a jingle or watch a mascot, do something, right? They want to interact with the product. They want to feel like they have an ongoing relationship, right, with the product. So you look at the most successful advertising out there right now, it's with these continuous characters like Flo, like the Gecko, etc. You look at their pages, they have millions of fans. Right? Flo is not a fictional character, and she gets something like 200 marriage proposals a week, on her Facebook page. And people become incredibly devoted and loyal to the product because of their relationship with basically a made-up character, right? But because there's a feeling of engagement, and that's really where communication is shifted, because of the way that we now work and engage and communicate through all of the different methods and technologies and avenues that we have. So think about your relationship with your own networks in a similar way. Right? You need to be that continuous character in the lives of all of the people in your networks, in your families, your friends, the people who interact with you. Because that's how you change hearts and minds over time, is through that continuous engagement. It's not the one-time messaging, right? You're not going to post some article or link from, Huffington Post and suddenly they're going to change their mind, right? It's going to be an ongoing conversation where first you establish your authority, your legitimacy, or your value as a source of information, right? Whether it's a broadcaster or the other form that I talked about was the pundit. Right? The pundit is someone who has the ability to actually shape conversation and actually drive a particular message within their social network. Right? And those are both valuable things to do, and one doesn't have to do both. Right? One can sort of see where their strengths lie and where they want to specialize. The key is, of course, to be consistent and to choose a method that works for you, and in Shakespeare to stick with that. Right? The continuous character doesn't work if he's or she is all over the map. Right? If he doesn't have or she doesn't have a consistent, continuous narrative story. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't have internal logic. So that's what we want to try to do as advocates, right? When you talk about something, when you look at what the Obama campaign is putting out there as their messaging, right? You take a look at that script that you have to launch. Keep an eye out. What are the stories out there, right? And don't just look at partisan sources, right? Because you want to be able to establish some legitimacy by using, sources that people trust regardless of their views, right? But what are the stories out there that are being told that jive with that message, right? For example, we talk a lot about this idea that we have this mutual responsibility for each other, that there's also a sense of that responsibility translates into a need for fairness and everyone going their own way, right? And that directly counters this sort of tax cuts for the rich kind of messaging, and then we don't help anybody else out and somehow it's supposed to work out, right? So if you see stories in the news about, the middle class struggling and people who are on the top, doing really, really well despite the recession, but that's not translating into the rest of the country, that's something you can put out there because it reflects and echoes that messaging that's already existing in the messaging that's brought along. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes, okay. So I do want to pivot just really quickly and talk a little bit about specialty media ethics, because that's something that we also want to talk about as an important echo chamber in our community. So several years ago, there was a statistic that said something like 62% of Asian Americans rely on ethnic media, in-language media, as their primary source of news. And I know that was true, that's very true for my parents. My parents read the Chinese newspaper, and they watch Chinese language television channels on satellite TV. And that's pretty much all they get their news from. And sometimes the news they get from there, when it's about American politics, can be kind of not the same thing that I think is going on in the real world. But, that's what they trust because that's their source of media, right? And ethnic media is something that, unfortunately, a lot of folks who don't normally work with our community don't realize the power of. They don't realize how to use it effectively. And it's not just about knowing about ethnic media, but what types of media are common in what types of communities. In the Vietnamese American community, for example, radio is huge, right? Whereas with the Chinese community, newspapers are going to be probably much more dominant. Right? And so when you know about ethnic media, you realize that it's so effective. The next thing that you realize, and that is very, very cool about this, is that the bar for entry to get on the stories, get on the pages, or into the content of ethnic media is really low. Right? Ethnic media outlets are starving for content. Like Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders in general, right? They tend to get kind of ignored, right? So anytime there's an ability to put content out there, they're going to jump on it. And the great thing about ethnic media is because they are so in need of this kind of content, you get to have a huge role in shaping what that message is going to be. I can't tell you the number of times I've just had numerous ethnic media outlets simply reprint press releases that I've sent them, that I've written, about political events or candidates or races. And they will do that. And if you say, why don't you interview this local candidate and put it on the front page, they're happy to do it because they never get that kind of content for their ethnic media. But one thing to keep in mind, that 62% statistic is from a few years ago. And just like with other forms of traditional media, ethnic media actually is also experiencing difficulty because of the internet, right? So realize that one thing that has started to happen with ethnic media is that online versions are starting to become very popular with people, but correspondingly they're losing revenue. So a lot of ethnic media outlets are now starting to consolidate and close, right? So you have to be aware of that and cognizant of that, what kind of effect that has. One just really quick example, World Journal is a Chinese language book. It's probably one of the most widely read national Chinese language books. Because of the same kind of shifts that newspapers have been seeing in English language media and loss of revenue, World Journal has now stopped paying most of their freelance reporters for the content that they create. Those reporters now have to sell advertising in order to support themselves. Right? This means that those reporters are now devoting even less time, right, to actually researching, finding those stories, and pursuing those leads. So they're now even more in need of the help of other people in the community like us to tell them what the stories are and to tell them what they need to be covered. Right? Having awareness and knowledge of that lets you be able to do that effectively. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Right? Ethnic media, while it's very unique to our community in many ways and offers us a lot of strengths, it's also subject to some of the same forces that the rest of the world is experiencing. So knowing those interactions is important. So again, once you know how to strategize about your message, once you understand the role of values and how to shape that message, then you got to think about what are the actual avenues for doing so, right? Planning your activities. And among those activities, I guarantee you that will be effective for your community, for our community, is going to be social media, using those networks effectively because 75% of us are online every single day, and using the ethnic media effectively because so many of us rely on it as our primary source.
Alright, so we're a little bit behind, so we're going to go right into fundraising. Quick question, well everyone stand up because I think we all use a stand up moment. How many people have to be out of here by 5?